Now, the next session, I'm very happy to have Oliver with us. Oliver, you spoke last time 12
years ago. Yeah.
12 years. Oh, first of all, Oliver, everyone. So 12 years ago. And I think like every time I hear Oliver speaking, there are always some things that stay with me for a while. So it's not like, some things that would stay for like a day or two and then they disappear. Now, usually there's something that stays for a while. And I think we will be having a lot of that today. So I don't want to spoil the session, but I'm very curious about what we're going to hear. So please, one more time, give a warm round of applause to Oliver, speaking on philosophy for designers. Oliver, off you go.
Thank you very much. I really cannot tell you how happy I am to be able to talk about two of my favorite topics today. I studied philosophy as a young man and then became a designer. And since then, I've always tried to connect the two. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work so well. I also do this regularly at conferences, but I think this time I really found a couple of tunnels between the two notions, because philosophy and design they're really far apart. The one is on this side here, looking at the world and putting, concrete things into the mind where they become notions, they become abstract, and they build some kind of a machine inside the head with all these notions, right? And then on the other side, you have design, and they do the very opposite. They have some abstract idea. We could make a writing app where you can only write, but really well. It's an abstract idea, and then they try to make it concrete, right? And they go exactly in the opposite direction. So it's a really far distance, but there are common things between the two notions. And I was never quite sure how to explain that. And when people asked me at first, mostly clients, asked me, so how does it happen that a guy that is on this side, the very abstract world, goes to the very opposite where they shape concrete things that people can touch? Can you explain this? And the problem with explaining this is that I would have had to tell them the truth. And the truth is sometimes quite embarrassing, right? So I'm not going to just tell you right away why I went from one side to the other, because it's a bit embarrassing. I have to get to know you first a little bit. But I can tell some things that are true, but are not quite the reason why I made this trip. And until the very end, you have to bear with me until you find out what the secret is. So the talk will consist of 3 parts: think, make, and face the truth. The think part is about philosophy, as you can imagine, and the make part is about what we do. We make stuff. And face the truth somehow is, connecting both. So let's start with my first excuse that I used when clients asked me, why and how can a philosopher become a designer? And I said, well, if you look at philosophy is the Arbeit am Begriff, working with notions, right? So Immanuel Kant, and I already lost all interest at this point, but I went on. Immanuel Kant was a good trick to not having to say the truth, right? Say Immanuel Kant in the Critique of the Pure Reason, and then the last client would be like, it's fine. He made these gigantic constructs of abstract notions, Reason and understanding, in German much more confusing, Verstand und Vernunft, right? No one knows really what they mean in definitions, right? And many others. He made these gigantic castles of notions, and in order to understand Immanuel Kant, I had to buy like big paper sheets and draw sitemaps. There's no other way. And you need more than A4, you need like paper rolls. So that's what I did in my living community. I rolled out these paper rolls, and then I started, with you have perception, you know, and then you go down, 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 and you have this gigantic tree that looks, in fact, and I am not making this up, this is the critique of the pure reason. It's a sitemap, right? And there, you know, I had the attention again from my clients. They're like, oh, yeah. That, yeah, kind of rings a bell. Some of them, you know, had heard about, you know, abstract notions and that they're somehow connected, right? Now, when you look at the actual book, at first, on page 13, it doesn't look that tragic, right? You have, you know, 2 books. You have the transcendental elementary lesson, and then you have the transcendental method in the second part, and it has 2 parts, and then, you know, it's like, yeah, okay, it's, what is it here? It's 800 pages, but it seems, I would say if this is a menu on a website, as an information architect now, I would say there's too much redundancy, right? You don't need to say Abschnitt, Abschnitt, Abteilung, then transcendental, transcendental, transcendental. I would try to clean it up, but I still think like, you know, the first menu point there, first part about space and about time, that sounds kind of interesting, right? What does Kant think about that? So it grabs my attention. I would probably do a better job, but that's how I got trained in information architecture. The bad news is that the true information architecture is on the back of the book. And then it looks like this. You see, like, it's a very deep hierarchy with paragraphs, first main part, second main part, first book, second book. There are books in books, and it's a total mess. It's like really bad information architecture. And, you know, it goes on, right? This is not everything. And then here we are at the end. So I don't know how many information architects still exist here, but, you know, if we got together working on this, I'm pretty sure we could shorten it down and clear things up a little bit, right? Also, you know, the words he uses, critique of the pure reason. He's like, yeah, well, it's not really a critique in the sense of I'm against pure reason. You can't be against because we all have that. It's another meaning of pure reason. And as an information architect, you say, like, no, you can't just define words as you want. Also, what does that mean, critique of pure? It's not a good title. This is not good communication design, I would say today. And back then, as a student, I actually felt exactly the same thing. But I thought, well, it's Immanuel Kant, he's a genius, so probably he knows what he's doing, and I just don't understand it. But I'm quite convinced now he's a bad writer, he's a bad information architect. In the Surkamp Taschenbuch Verlag, I hope no one's here. Oh, no, actually, they should be here because they need to face the truth. They cannot publish the same thing since 1974 and say it's good. It can't. The paper's bad. Now, this is an edition from 1989, and you tell, like, yeah, you're old with the white hair, and that's why it's yellow. It was yellow already when I bought it. And you know that. You know that's how it is with the Surkamp Taschenbuch Wissenschaft. You're like, ooh, Surkamp Taschenbuch. It must be like this. No. No, it's bad paper, it's bad printing. And, you know, when we coming back to Kant's information architecture, you know, he didn't have one critique, right? He had, you know, the Grundlegung der Metaphysik. He had the 3 critiques, and if you put everything together, which you need to know, and if you're crazy like me and you choose the 3 critiques for your final test, you need to know all this somehow. So you need a lot of paper, and you need a lot of... And so you can imagine now that, you know, moving from the philosophical seminary and with Immanuel Kant to an internet startup in 1999. And they tell me, can you make a sitemap for Zürich Versicherung? I was like, piece of cake, right? So this is how the German idealism can help you, you know, with the basics of interaction design, with information architecture. Also somewhat old-fashioned, sounds a bit like, you know, something from the 18th century almost nowadays. Unfortunately, this is the name of our company, and now with, you know, IA and AI, it's really a bad choice. But I didn't know, you know, that there's going to be this hype. The previous company I had was called SARX, and then SARS came, and then we had to change. But now we're there for like 20 years, and it's worse than SARS, right? It's worse than COVID, I think, likely, possibly. But I can't change now. It's, we bought the domain ia.net. In case you're still interested, you can check that out. And I'm not going to give up just because everybody thinks, they need to now generate everything. So German idealism helps for information architecture. Now, when it comes to user experience, I really suggest that you look into the phenomenology. And here again, the designers and developers among you will not, that don't have much experience in philosophy, will not just go by and Edmund Husserl, and then just start reading Husserl. It's the same mess, right? You don't understand what the hell is going on in there unless you have a proper training, and even then you're never really sure that you understand what they meant. But one thing you will take away if you start with Wikipedia is that Edmund Husserl said, there has been a lot of abstraction and a lot of talking, a lot of information architecture, a lot of systematic philosophy. Maybe reality is not as systematic as Kant thought, because Kant wanted to be, he wanted to explain, the world as if it were a clockwork, right? And at the time when Edmund Husserl was around, clocks were not that fancy anymore. So he was like, we need something new, and I think we should just look at how things appear. And just forget everything we know and just focus on how things appear. Because one thing that he took away from Kant was that we do not understand what is out there directly. We only understand it if we project stuff into it. So Kant was 150 years before neuroscience is that's our thing. He said that we only understand what we project into things, and Husserl was like, yeah, but it's kind of true, because when I look at the tree, I think the trunk is brown, but when I look again, it's actually gray, right? So there is something we can learn when we just really look at the appearances. And I had a philosophy teacher at high school that was a phenomenologist, aesthetic phenomenologist, and one of his main things was that he didn't like computers. He said, especially writing with computers, this is how it looked at the time, writing with computers, that's not a good thing. When people use fonts that look like the fonts in the books, they do not think about writing, but they think about filling the page because it looks as if they're almost done. So they think their job when entering, a text editor is just to fill the page. They think when they have a book, the hard part was filling it with characters, but that's not the hard part of writing. Anyone can type some shit, right? And if you're a good typer, you can fill a book. And he says, the hard part about writing is to get inside and deal with what you feel. Because he was a phenomenologist, he would really observe in slow motion what happens when you do stuff or when you get in touch with things. He would analyze in slow motion how the feelings from your belly, make a mess, and then your mind goes there and tries to, make a shape out of all these feelings, and these shapes would turn into words or images, different forms of languages. And he's like, that's what the problem is with writing. You need to deal with what you feel and find words for it, and not fill the page with stuff. And I was like, yeah, this is a bit, I was 17, and I was like, I had other feelings than, what happens when I open a text editor. And he also said some really upsetting stuff about you cannot kiss in public because it's unethical. It's like, he's a conservative man. We all use computers now, and I kind of enjoy writing with Times New Roman, and he doesn't get it. And then 20 years later, we came out with this thing. Because he said the only way you could write with a computer maybe is if you use typewriter fonts, but it's kind of kitsch, right? Why don't you use a typewriter right away? And somehow, I ended up making a writing program that uses monospaced fonts and, gives people some special things that typewriters don't have, like syntax highlight for natural language, because I actually got into writing, found out that with this feeling thing, he was right. And it helps to have the same syntax highlight in coding as you have in coding in writing. And then it has a function that shows you cliches and filler words, because these are actually also not that cool for writing. And to this day, I think this feature set is not shared very much by other apps. And then, you know, because I still had kind of like a bad feeling that it is a bit kitsch to use monospace fonts, because monospace fonts on typewriters make sense, but why on the screen, right? The reason is that every character counts and that you need to slow down. Proportional fonts speed you up, and monospace fonts slow you down. So I was like, I'm going to slow down people even more by giving these wide characters that create these like dense spots up there, giving them more space. So I made this dual space font, wasted a lot of time, and I made it variable so I could grade it like they would do in old times, where, you know, the smaller the font, the bolder it gets, so you can still read it, right? And the wider it gets. And that's the type of stuff that I invested a lot of time in the last 20 years, so that, you know, the monospace font always looks good on dark backgrounds when it's small and it's big and it scales and the line height changes and all the stuff. And now, in all fairness, my philosophy teacher was not the only inspiration. I actually found out that typewriters work better when I had to teach Microsoft Word to art school students, and I observed how they always fuck around with the fonts instead of writing, right? And when I asked them, why are you never writing? I'm here to teach you how to make white papers, and you're always changing the fonts. They said, well, writing's not fun. You know, this is much more fun for me to change colors and sizes and line heights and margins. And then I realized I'm actually doing the same thing. Every time I opened Microsoft Word, I thought like, yeah, the margin's a bit wide, the font's a bit small, maybe something's wrong with the line height, and maybe I should use Arial. No, Arial's not good, definitely not Arial. But let me try what other fonts there are instead of writing. So, and that's why we made a typewriter where you can't change the font. We went in the writing app, we can't change the font, so people don't fuck around with the fonts and just write, which is, of course, a bit obnoxious, but it worked. Now, my phenomenologist teacher was not only a phenomenologist that looks at stuff in slow motion and trains us for user experience, because I didn't realize as a designer, this is what we do as well. We really we really look at things very precisely, and, you know, when you, for example, compare a user interface where you mostly type to a point-and-click interface, you need to really slow things down, like in the Matrix. And then you notice that to type a headline in Markdown, you know, you click Shift-3, space, and you type. And when you do it with a point-and-click device, what you do is you lift your hand off the keyboard, you shake the mouse. Where is it? Here's the mouse. You go with the mouse, and you click there, and you drag it, and it's always a bit of a game, even after years of using mice. It's not so easy to mark it right, and then you let it go, and then, you know, you go with the mouse, and you click the button, and then when you click the button, it turns bold. But then you have to go back. So, you know, this type of observation from my philosophy teacher is actually quite exciting if you're into design, where you're like, oh, I discovered in slow motion what exactly happens and why point and click is actually not the best thing. It goes on because a true phenomenologist then says, yeah, well, maybe I missed something because I was so busy with the clicking and so on. And indeed, you miss a lot. And here neuroscience helps us and tells us, well, in fact, you missed how much time it takes to point and click. And you missed it because you were so busy doing this, you didn't realize it was 20 seconds you fucked around with the mouse. Because you were so busy, and because you were so busy, and you changed mode from shaping your feelings into words to fucking around with the mouse. That now you're totally confused, because then you have to go back again to, you know, search your feelings. You can't write with a point-and-click device. And that's why we use Markdown, not because Markdown has many other qualities, but because of the phenomenology of writing. Now it gets much worse. It gets much worse. I really have to warn you. It gets worse and worse, and then it gets a bit better when we come to making, right? Die Frankfurter Schule, another German philosophical tradition. It's at the absolute, like if you think Kant is trostlos, is sad and dry, and he was very sad and lonely and dry. The Frankfurter Schule, they're way worse. They're way worse. And the problem is that with the Frankfurter Schule, Horkheimer and Adorno did a good thing. They wrote in dialogue, for at least not this loneliness as Kant, who was always by himself. And they said, like, something went wrong. It was at the end of the war, obviously. And they said, like, well, it's not just Auschwitz. It's also this industrial thing we're in, this capitalistic system we're in. Somehow everything's bullshit. Remember what Brad Frost said? Adorno and Horkheimer said that already in 1949. All the movies we watch, all the music we hear, it's all the same. It's not good, it's not beautiful, and the world is a very dark place. It was like the Matrix without Kung Fu. What they painted, and my philosophy teacher was completely convinced this is the case, right? So he told us, and they write in a weird way because Kant was a bad writer. They're excellent writers, but they wrote in a complicated way because they were scared of the capitalist coming, using their information and making more money with it. So they made it complicated on purpose. It's well written. So they say, Kultur heute. They always put words in the wrong order because that, confuses the capitalists, right? Kultur heute schlägt alles mit Ähnlichkeit. Film, Radio, Magazine machen ein System aus. Jede Sparte ist einstimmig in sich und alle zusammen. So it's weird, right, the way they speak. Die ästhetischen Manifestationen noch der politischen Gegensätze verkünden gleichermaßen das Lob des stählernen Rhythmus. Just like in the Matrix, you don't need to understand it word by word. You just go with the general feeling, and it's like, yeah, there's a stählerner Rhythmus, and there's the industry, right? Die dekorativen Verwaltungs- und Ausstellungsstätten der Industrie sind in den autoritären und anderen Ländern kaum verschieden. So they say America is like, Germany, and they say that in 1949. So it's kind of exaggerated, right? But they also added in a very cryptical, paranoid way that the capitalists might use that to make more money. They said, like, this is a Flaschenpost. It's a message in a bottle. Maybe, some things may sound a bit bizarre to you, but we hope that in the future someone takes this book, opens it, and really understands what we're saying. When I heard that in the 90s, I was like, come on. We have Reservoir Dogs is cool, right? It's not every movie is the same. There's Scorsese, and there's Cassavetes, started getting into movies. And the music, we have Tom Waits, I thought that's very, refined. And it's not all, catch-a-goo-goo. And, and Jimi Hendrix is kind of cool. But my philosophy teacher was not convinced. And, but I kept this idea of a Flaschenpost. And unfortunately, these days, it's kind of scary, It's kind of scary when you see like how all our tech friends that, say they're on our side, they thank the authoritarian regimes, give them free gold bars and stuff like that. It feels a lot. When you look at what happens with AI, you kind of hear the rhythm of the industry, and you understand what they were saying. It's like, enlightenment was okay, but not everything's rational. We have beauty, and we have justice, and we have good and bad, and you can't measure that stuff. What makes us human, friendship and love, you can't measure it. It just stop. Don't try to put everything into numbers. And in our industry, we're completely out of control with this kind of thing. So, he was really like I said, it's the Matrix without Kung Fu. It's very dark, and it kind of helped me in the last couple of years This was the first developer of IA Writer that worked on the first version. He's now joining venture capitalists there and says that software is eating the world now, AI eats software. Thinks it's kind of funny. I don't think it's funny, but when ChatGPT came out, you know, Adorno came back for me, and I was like, we need to do something, because if they put AI into everything, if people read with AI and people, you know, write with AI, no one's really doing anything anymore. Become these batteries like in the Matrix. So I want to at least offer a function in my writing app that highlights what is not from you. So if you really want to use it like that, you know, you can, but then at least you're in control and you remember what you've written and what you haven't. And it took a long time to make this work in plain text. In the end, we put YAML at the end of the text body and hit the YAML so it looks like it's doing this without, you know, RTF or any tricks like that. You can actually, if you're really plump, you can, you know, copy and paste stuff from ChatGPT and then mark it as AI. This was, you know, inspired by Adorno, a bit desperate. I sometimes use it when I do proof, when I do, you know, spell checking, but I still want to see what it changes, and my app does that. Okay, so this was philosophy, and you have been warned, right? It should be a bit better now. I want to look at the actual design of philosophy, because I know the way to get designers interested into something is that you have to show them that they could do it better. And then they want to understand the problem, and then they can do the craziest stuff. I remember how I started getting interested in insurances when I had to do the, you know, sitemap for Zürich Versicherung. I was like, I need to understand how insurances work. Like, who would have thought I would ever get interested in that? You know, this is the typical classic design of Surkamp Taschenbuch Verlag. Like a sad blue and like not a good color contrast, right? Bad title, as I mentioned already. You have some signs of the 70s, Surkamp Taschenbuch Wissenschaft, lowercase, definitely from the 70s. I checked 1974. And then on the back of the cover, again, a bit of communication design. You know, how do they want to invite us into the book? They say that the thorny path of the critique, you know, would lead to a scholarly correct, but only really, you know, and so on and so on. Hopla. They say it's a thorny path in the critique of the pure reason, and their interest is not to invite us into the book. What's going on here? Maybe it's better if you hear me. Is that better? Okay. So it's not really an invitation, but maybe, you know, the second volume has a better text, and I put the same thing. Right? It's not for you, you know, unless you are like really smart, really courageous and bright. And me as a 17-year-old, it's like, I'm courageous and bright. I'm going to show you that I'm going to read this, right? This is, you know, the type of provocation that works for me. But then when you open it, you know, they start with Latin, they put everything in italics. Luckily, there's a translation. Everything in small fonts, bad printing. And then, you know, the courageous, supposedly bright mind comes to the first page, and it says, gnädiger Herr, you know, like, and you don't want to read all this as a young man, and then it says, ehrwürdige Exzellenz, untertänig gehorsamster Diener. And you're like, where's the courage now? So he writes that to the royal minister, and he's like, submissive and most, what's gehorsam, Stephen? I wrote that down. Most obedient servant. And you're like, this is not like, so it's not addressed to me, I'm the reader, it's to some state minister, and he's like, yeah, it's in the time, they had kings, they had probably their reasons. So you're like, so let's get started. Vorrede, oh, everything in italics. Oh my God! And then the language. I'm not gonna, you know, torture you to death with the language. It's really like hard one. It's like Latin with German words. And it's still this bad print, right? And then the second page with the Latin, you're like, yeah, but soon it stops. It's like these magazines in the 70s that had these colored pages you couldn't read, right? It's the same feeling. Because it's a small book, all in these, and you know, I like italics here and there. It's beautiful. Like, and the Garamond italics are wonderful. I love them. Love to look at them, but not for so many pages, right? And then finally, what is it, page 69, and that's an accident because there was nothing sensual about Immanuel Kant. Yeah, now he starts, right? So transcendental aesthetics, you know, and yeah, so let's get started. Definition. At the time I used to write in my books, and back with the italics, right? And then I was like, what? Why so much italics? You can't read so many italics. Italics were invented actually not because they're pretty, but because they save space, right? So it's very painful. And it goes on and on with italics. Now the print becomes really bad, right? And this is very difficult to read. So my impression is, because you cannot not communicate, as Václavík says, they do that on purpose. They must do that on purpose. So I found out, no, they just put everything italics that is, you know, only in the first or only the second edition. I don't remember. So you can differentiate and have all these lines in between to show where the page is turned in the original. Why? It's difficult. Why do you put all these lines and have a bad print and so on? It's really annoying, and it goes on with the italics. And you see that now there's no more notes. This is the page where I bought this when I was 17, very precautious then already. At page 164, I gave up because so many italics, I just couldn't do it. I didn't know at the time that actually I read the most important stuff because, you know, everything else, you just need to read the foreword, and everything else is a bit tedious. The chapters on room and time are very interesting, and yeah, if you have the stomach and you have some training, you can give it a try, but get a good edition. Please get a good edition. Don't Surkamp. Forget that, right? So you could say it's not fair, right? It's like, yeah, you know, you have an old book, and you know, this is how it is, and all Surkamp-Taschenbücher are like that, not just philosophy, and yeah, but philosophy is really hard to understand. It's not like a novel where you can, you know, if you get the characters, you're kind of still there, even though I would also like to read a novel in a nice print. So it's not fair, and we know that attitude, right, this defensive attitude when we get feedback from people, right? The problem is, they still print the same shit, right? And it's still, I went to check, I think I saw a slightly altered version somewhere, but it's still the same inside. It's the same thing, it's the same machine, it's the same printing method. There's no updates since 1974. You could say, oh yeah, you know, we could be lucky that Surkamp still exists and philosophy doesn't make money, but I don't think this is good design. So let's take a more contemporary example now, the logic of information. Again, with the designer's eye, the cliche and the kitsch here already, right? Like, oh, the butterfly and the logic board, ooh, the information, right? This is not, and this is a fantastic book, by the way. He tries to be the Immanuel Kant of the 21st century, and he's on his way, in good and bad ways, in fact. You can say the same thing, the logic of information. It's like, is that really something? Does that mean anything? Does that interest anyone? Yeah, maybe. And why off in italics, right? Is that the voice, the logic of information? You're like, this is just bad design, right? Also, to my taste, a bit too light, but that's just taste, right? No, it is really bad design. Come on. Like the back side of the book, who's going to read this? No one. And you know why? Because it's totally irrelevant. Maybe they did it on purpose, because if you read this, you're definitely not going to buy this book. It's the same trick as Immanuel Kant. He's on this way, right? In good and bad ways, because as I said, there's some of the best stuff in there that has been published in the last 10 years. The lines are a bit long, the font is small, language is not that great. He's Italian, though. It's like my English, so let's not be judgmental. He's been professor at Oxford, and now he's a professor at Yale. He knows his shit, and you know, he's not a great writer, but he does a good job on social media, so he does care that people see him. It's just his writing is a bit, and then the infographics. Like, find the 10 differences here, right? It's like... And it's, again, it actually gets worse because, you know, I felt that when you started to write this, I was also very upbeat and was like, okay, that's a really bad infographic, but let's continue. Let's see what comes next, right? And the infographics keep getting worse and worse. And then, you know, as a designer, I'm like, who approved this, right? This is the University of Oxford. They must be able to afford someone doing infographics, right? Come on. Excel, right? We know you don't need 3D here. Why so gray, right? Why so many lines? And of course, you have the spider graphic. Someone's doing something really well here, that's what we can tell, right? But not the infographics. A completely useless table. And then, you know, in case you didn't know how playing cards look, here's an illustration. Or chess, never seen a chessboard? You know, this is one of the most popular first moves. And then it gets worse. Then he goes, you know, all analytic philosophy. That was like a trend at the beginning of the 20th century where philosophers like, you know what? That thing with like going overboard with rationality, let's go really hardcore on this. And treat philosophy as if it were math and put everything into logical terms. And then just combine shit and see what happens in the end. They found out, you know, after about like 20 years, actually not much comes out of it. Like the most talented of these guys said, yeah, what you can talk about, you should shut the fuck up, something like that. That's what he concluded after pages and pages of math. And in the end, he said, like, you know what, this is all bullshit. Let's forget about it, Wittgenstein. But he's still on it. He's totally in love with this stuff. And then at the end of the book, after he made his good points, he's just filling it with formulas that no one understands. But I gave my best, and I used ChatGPT as well because it was really tiring. And in fact, he's not saying much. And, you know, what was really painful for me as well, and here's again, you know, it's not his fault, but it also is, because I talked to some people that have published books, and it's like, I care. I really care that my book can be read. And every page is like this thing, right? So it's not just making you dizzy with the information, but it's also you have to read like this all the time, right? Unless you go like, fuck this, right? So yeah, user testing, user research, and user feedback is something that they don't believe in philosophy. I think they would benefit a lot. They don't know how to make things because they write their stuff and then, you know, Surkamp does it or the Oxford Press does it or something. And this would actually be the only thing that they make. I think they should care. I think they should get involved with typography, with communication design, writing good, interesting titles. Maybe they would sell a couple of books then, you know. We know how to make things, and, you know, our perspective is, yeah, you know, I have an idea, that's right, and I discuss it, and I think about it, and then I make a sketch and see if it works. Usually it doesn't work, and I think about it again, I make a sketch, and then, you know, make a prototype, and then I'll let people use it. And before all that, I talk to my audience. Philosophers don't do that. They don't talk to their audience. They don't even know who their audience really is. They think it's all the professors, but they are busy doing the same shit, right? Reading old books and, you know, writing footnotes. But we know, like, what happens when you make stuff. You have to test all the time. You have to test with yourself. You have to test with the people that are supposed to then use your books. And then, you know, the most terrifying moment for us is when we're like, yeah, I think I can't improve it much more without going bankrupt or going crazy, so I'm going to publish it now, right? I'm going to launch the app. I'm going to launch the website. And then, you know, we're there and we're waiting for the feedback. And the worst that can happen is we get no feedback, right? And the second worst is, you know, that some enemy finds you and tries to destroy you. It's actually not that bad. There's no feedback. But we know that until we launch something, it's not real, right? It's just something we think, it's a theory. Something we think might be useful, and only when we publish it, it happens. And that's our process, and I think philosophers could benefit so much from that. As much as we can benefit from Kant for information architecture and Husserl for phenomenology and so on, and Adorno when it comes to AI, we know how to make stuff, and we should get engaged. You know, if they really fire us everywhere because they think ChatGPT can do our job and they don't believe that we're Phil Collins, we should go help philosophers. And they can help us too, you know. Now, funny enough, there are some philosophers, the fringe group that have discovered that only what we make is real. Like Giambattista Vico discovered that in the 1500s, right? He was like, dude, the pizza I make, I really understand it when I make this pizza. When I eat it, I have an idea, but when I make the pizza and then I let someone taste that pizza, there's something happening that doesn't happen when I just read a book. So he discovered maker's knowledge. You know, after 2,000 years of philosophizing, since Socrates, no one went and checked and made stuff. They just theorized because they were like, oh, the hands get dirty if I make things, right? Socrates was different, but they killed him because he was too practical, right? And then from Plato on, they were like, oh no, the Greeks had a word for that, banausia, people that work with their hands, right? They were banausen, the Germans understand that word, banausen, right? And the philosophers like, oh no, we don't use our hands, right? But it took an Italian from Naples to figure out like, hey, actually, whenever I make something, be it a pizza, it wasn't called margarita just yet because Margarita wasn't born. But whenever I make something, when I build something, I feel I really understand what I'm doing. I mean, the final feedback is still missing. If it really works, other people need to tell me. But there's something way more important when I make things and way more true. And he was like, okay, let's use some Latin to explain that. He says, you know, the truth is the made. And the funny thing is, you know, the fact is still present in there. You know, only what is made is fact. And they forgot about him. And the reason why I like Floridi so much, another Italian, is because he made me discover Giambattista Vico. Before that, that was a name that I heard, but it wasn't so important. And I got really obsessed about that, you know, that made truth. And it really finally opened up this tunnel between design on the one side and philosophy on the other side. I think that when we make things and we let other people use these things, we're facing the truth. And that's actually what philosophers are after, but they kind of are scared because they never make things. And we had such a moment when we made a presentation app that was like IA Writer. We were like, yeah, you know, actually, in thinking first, the real way to make a presentation is you have an idea, you make a structure, you work on the message, then you memorize it, and then you perform. And so, but you look at Keynote or PowerPoint, they start with design. It should be done, maybe even forgot. Doesn't matter that much, the design there at first, at least. And you can see it, how many people then use this default template that has no design because you can focus better. And we were like, you know, we start with the message. First, you write your speech. Then you add imagery, and we make this responsive so that it works, you know, desktop format as well as on the phone, because every time someone sends me a presentation on the phone, I have to, like, you know, do all this interaction, and I can't focus on the message. So it's a responsive design that also then works in the browser that you can easily share over a phone. You can write it on the phone, you can share it on the phone, you can read it on the phone. And it took a long time to make this work, as you can imagine, because there are many different layouts. We all do that all automatically without AI. We actually thought about what works best, depending on how many elements you have on a page. And we're very excited because we thought, you know, we heard that Jeff Bezos doesn't like the typical PowerPoint. He wants a handout. And when you first write the message, you actually end up with a plain text document with some images. It's really nice to consume. And, when we launched, at first, you need to, if you study philosophy, you're trained in Stoicism, so you can't take a hit, right? That's a really good advice, by the way, if you deal with user feedback. Read some Stoics, it doesn't really matter so much what they say. You still need to take the information and improve it. Some are very excited, and some say, Achtung, Beta, right? The German fellow, wasn't happy with it. Even though this app is like 5 years old, and there was a small feature that didn't work. Like if you have custom templates, you couldn't upload it to iOS because we didn't know that you had to have special permissions for that because in the testings, whatever. Now, the question is, where's the truth, right? Because, in fact, he was right. Like, we had to fix this thing, so it's not like he was lying or something. This is much more interesting than, this is a wonderful thing and everybody should use it. It's not very useful when people are too excited about your product, and unless they describe something you didn't know. But the negative ones I always read, right? And the more negative, the more I read it. And I'm like, hit me, I want to improve. And but what's the truth? Is it in between? So is the app kind of good, but not that exciting? No, the truth is a completely different one. When we launched it, we thought that, as I said, it's going to help businesses write less bullshit presentations, and Jeff Bezos is going to get excited, and we're going to take over the world. But the truth was that teachers were getting excited about it. And business people fucking hated it. Because they couldn't bullshit their way through the day anymore. They couldn't look busy anymore because it's really fast. You write down, presentation, add a couple of images, you're done in 20 minutes with a normal presentation. Like this one took me forever, but not everybody talks about philosophy and design, So, but a normal presentation I can make in 20 minutes. And it's pretty good. It works like writing an email and then you add some images and the rest is done by the app. And it looks actually quite nice. It looks much better than PowerPoint when a regular person uses, not one of these star designers here. And the truth is also that only after 15 years of making a text editor, we realized, actually, our writing app is also good for education. It took us 15 years to understand that pupils probably write better like this than like this. Just aesthetically already obvious. So the conclusion, I'm completely over time and I'm really sorry, but I have to make this final point because now I want to tell you why I went from philosophy to design. The reason was just simply that I got a job from a branding agency to take pictures for a reunion they had, and they paid me $3,000, even though I had no idea of taking pictures. I didn't know how these two things work on the camera. I jumped in for a friend that got sick. He's like, "Can you go? You just need to take pictures. You can take pictures. Here's the camera." And I was just like, one film was fucked up, and the other one was all like, I'm a bad photographer. But they paid me $3,000. And that was exciting. So I asked the boss of Interbrand, where I worked in later, what are you guys doing? Why do you pay $3,000 for a photographer? I pretended to be a professional photographer, obviously, and he was kind of like, that's normal. And we do branding, and he explained to me that branding is you design a logo for the Deutsche Telekom, and they give you 3 million francs. And that's why I was like, that's where I'm going now. I want to design a logo and get 3 million francs, man. And I was very much in the Adorno world, and I was like, I'm going to write a doctorate. But when I heard 3 million francs, even philosophers, you can buy them at 3 million for a logo. But what I learned then, as a designer is that, truly, we only understand what we make. So it comes really as a big shock when, as a designer, as a philosopher, you always think and talk and write these papers, and maybe the professor reads it, grades you, and so on. You think like, this is how it is, right? I thought about this really precisely. It must be true. And when you do that in design, you know what happens. Like it's like all wrong and wrong and wrong. You have to try again and try again and try again. So you have to make it. You have to put it out there, and then you realize that what makes reality is not inside your head, and it's not out there. It's not like that, because Kant told us already, like, we don't really know what's out there because we can only perceive what we're made for and what we project into things. And we also know we can't be just in here because we actually learn things. If it were only what we project, we couldn't learn things. I figured that out. And Plato also has the same problem. He's like, yeah, well, there's like magic where you remember from a past life. But you're like, yeah, but in the past life, how did I learn in the past life, right? And the simple truth is by talking to other people, right? The philosophers don't figure out that we learn by communicating and interacting with each other. That's how reality builds itself. That intelligence is not a matter of IQ in my mind, but a matter of how we interact with each other, right? And in the same way that language is not something that's right or wrong, but something that we share. No teacher can say like, oh, this is not German, you know, this is just you. It's like, language is something that we share. I understood that in my philosophy studies, but I never got to the point to understand that, you know, truth itself is made, it's shared, and perpetually remade through interaction. That's why it changes all the time, right? So people have different perspectives, and that doesn't mean you have your truth and I have mine. Like when we talk to each other and when we interact together, something new happens out of that. And as designers, we know this is how it works. This is how we build things. This is how we know if what we thought we did is really what it is, or if it's something else. And at another time, I'm going to tell you why I studied philosophy, but I am 15 minutes over time, and I promised I won't be. But I hope it was worth it. Oh, yeah. Please give me a reality check as well. We made a notebook that is kind of magical, so magical that you can't see the magic here. It has lines when you write and no lines after you've written because of the contrast between the lines and the paper. It's very Japanese. I forgot that IA was founded in Japan. It has like watermark lines that you can also, if you're really into it, look through the light and you see this kind of how beautiful it is. We made this after years and years of doing digital products, and you know, in a general feeling like we need to do something tangible. It's very nicely packaged. So if you're not so much into writing in notebooks, you definitely know someone that would love a nice present. That's how it was conceived. After presenter, we felt we need to make a nice present for people. And so give me feedback. It also won stuff. Give me feedback to my email, and the 3 best reality checks, I'll just decide which one are the best. So don't just be evil, be like very precise. The best 3 reality checks that help me, yeah, that's not on purpose, the missing N. That helped me, you know, improve for next time. They will get a book. I will reply today, and you know, then you can come to me and pick up the book. I have 2. No, I have 3. I have 3 books to give out. So you know, whoever, maybe not even 3, write me because they were so, you know, bored. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Oliver. We have, I think, 2 minutes.
Oh yeah.
Just quick 2 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll wrap up. Well, I think that missing N was really turn you off.
Yeah. No, my attention is not the best. That's why I study philosophy, you know.
That's okay. We have a question about philosophy.
Sure.
So we have Just here, or Just, asking, Kant sees aesthetics as aspiring to universality, while Foucault emphasizes how knowledge and aesthetics are shaped by power structures. When you design, do you aim for timeless universality, or do you embrace the cultural and political contingency of design?
Ooh, very special question. So, you know, when Kant talks about aesthetics, he mostly means art, right? So the idea that aesthetics, you know, has an industrial dimension as we mostly talk about aesthetics these days, we think about Apple or Eames and things like that when you talk about aesthetics, not just about art, you know, makes it very hard to answer this question. Foucault is a bit of, you know, is the French version of Adorno. He was very obsessed with power and with how power structures reality, right?
I wouldn't be able to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a specialized
Okay.
answer. Foucault, the late Foucault has his points, but he was highly subversive, and it will lead too far. But not Kant, not Foucault, because in fact there is as good as no philosopher that has clearly and simply thought about design, because they don't make stuff. So there is lately some literature on design in philosophy, but you know, you have a Hegel scholar that you don't understand anything he's doing. It's horribly designed. It's also in Surkamp Taschenbuch Verlag. Otherwise a nice guy, but it's really like not for beginners, and he knows a lot about art because he plays jazz piano and knows about games and stuff, but I have a different understanding of design than, you know, the academical philosophers. And,
I think that maybe just one more minute. What do you think are critical skills that designers and engineers sitting here in this room need today to stay relevant for years to come?
I truly believe that, you know, at least understanding the different types of philosophical ethics these days would really work. You know, so there is, you know, the ethic of duty, and that applies very much to your job, for example. You know, and then I think Epicurean ethics is something you can, you know, celebrate with your friends. And knowing that there are different philosophical schools, I left that out in my speech, but studying different philosophers helps you understanding different perspectives already. But understanding different types of ethics, you know, start with Wikipedia, don't start with the critique of the practical reason, even though I think it's his best, most readable book, also the slimmest. I think ethics definitely, you know, there's a lot in there that is not public knowledge, and a lot of very valuable things that you can use for yourself.
Okay. Maybe Sasha is wondering, that's a really very quick answer. What is your take on Silicon Valley nihilism infecting the thinking of engineers and designers all over the world these days? What can we do with that?
So seriously, like the obsession with trying to prove that everything can be measured, weighed, and counted, it's terrifying. It's not just dumb and wrong and obviously mistaken, because what matters to us as humans mostly is not measurable. I know that money matters, and I told you why I started to design, because I thought I'd get rich. It was so wrong there, but...
That's very inspiring.
But yeah, what truly matters can't be measured and weighed, and that they believe that, you know, they can reach any form of intelligence by just, you know, mixing and jumbling numbers is really depressing. The power that they have in the meantime, though, because it works with money, because money can be measured, but if you have a lot of money, it doesn't mean you're right? I mean, unless I'm fundamentally mistaken in the way I perceive the world, rich people are not necessarily smarter or more right than we are. They're just really good at money. And I see this as extremely dangerous with the way that politics evolve in the same direction, where it's this over-rationalization. I indeed think, like, when I read Adorno these days, I don't think like, yeah, come on, chill a bit, you know. There's Pulp Fiction and there's Tom Waits. My music taste and film taste have changed a bit as well, but it's really scaringly accurate how they describe Silicon Valley today. So I cannot say like read Horkheimer or Adorno, because it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult. But you can read the Wikipedia page and see if that's something you want to get into. And it is definitely a good exercise in a time where, you know, the attention span gets lower and lower. As I said, I studied philosophy as a form of medication, because actually paying attention, as you can see with my final N, is not my strength. And philosophy forced me to go through the worst boredom and learn to concentrate.
Okay. Well, with this, thank you so much for being with us, Oliver.